Good afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome to this webinar. My name is Frank O'Mara, and I'm the President of the Animal Task Force, and I'm going to moderate this session this afternoon. The title of our webinar is How to Re-implement Crop and Livestock Synergies, and it's in the context of research and innovation towards a more sustainable and circular European agriculture. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a webinar. We have a lot of people attending. So in order to allow interaction between the attendees and the speakers, we're using Mentimeter. And many of you are probably familiar with that, but it's a tool that we use to allow people to ask questions and also to allow us to ask questions of the audience and to see what your views are. So to participate in it, and I would encourage all of you to participate, you just log on to menti.com on your phone, and you will be prompted to enter a code. And when you enter the code, you are brought straight into this session. And we have a starter question, is to indicate for us what type of organization you are from. So we will see, we will get a picture of the spread or the type of stakeholders that are represented among the audience, and it will help you to see how you can use Mentimeter. You can also use it to ask questions, and the other feature on it is that when you see the questions that have been asked by other people, you can vote to say that you like them, and the more likes that a question gets means that it's a more popular question, so therefore it is likely to be asked first if there is a long queue of questions. So, but you will see that as you're going using the feature. So hopefully you're all voting on that first question, or not voting, but you're all indicating what your type of organization is, and we will see the results of that in a moment. Next slide, please. So that's our agenda for this afternoon. So I'm not going to read down through it. You can see the way we have the afternoon structured, but there is there's plenty of time for discussion. So the discussion will be through asking your questions on Mentimeter, or if you wish to use the chat function, you can also ask a question there. So maybe we have the results of the first question now. Could we see those? Okay, while we're waiting for the results of that question as what type of organization do you represent to come up, I would just like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded so that we can show it afterwards. So you see we have been able to compile the results of your answers, and you can see as more people are inputting their answer, the numbers are slightly changing, but about approximately 40% of our attendees come from research organizations, 11% from a university or a similar institution, 19% have not indicated any type of organization yet, 14% are from business or industry, 8% from an international organization, and so on. So you see we have a very good spread of stakeholders there. So we will move on now to the next question on Mentimeter. And this is in relation to the topic of our presentation today, which is around reconnecting livestock and crop production. So we want you to indicate what you see as the main benefits for reconnecting crop and livestock production. And the way we will take account of your answers is that they will appear as a word cloud. So you can see already somebody has inputted sustainability, somebody else has inputted circularity, obviously a number of people have put in sustainability, and so on. So that's how the Mentimeter works. So we'll see how that develops over the next minute or two, just while we're watching the results come in there, just to briefly outline the background to this webinar. It results from a joint initiative between the European Technology Platform Plants for the Future and the Animal Task Force. And the Plants for the Future is a membership-based platform which represents the agricultural innovation system from fundamental plant research to crop production and food processing. And the Animal Task Force, of which, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the president. That's a European public-private partnership linking European industry and research providers for developing innovation in the livestock system. And the two organisations came together to produce a joint paper on linking our reconnecting livestock and crop production. And we have just also recently produced a policy brief on that. And today is a webinar to present that paper. So I see the word cloud is forming some very definite trends, and the big benefit that people see from reconnecting livestock and crop production is sustainability, and that's very much obviously in the context of circularity and achieving the circular food system that's possible through connecting livestock and crop production. Resilience is another word that's coming through very strongly, that it obviously delivers greater resilience to the system. Autonomy, and I guess what's meant there is that Europe can provide its own protein for its own livestock industries if we reconnect the livestock and crop industries. Food security, soil sustainability, integrated production, ecosystem services. So lots of other suggestions, nutrient efficiency. Okay, so that's useful. Anyway, we see a couple of very highly voted or put forward words. The next question we have now, which we'll move on to on Mentimeter, is what would be the showstoppers? In other words, what are the barriers? What can stop this great concept of reconnecting livestock and crop production? What can be a barrier to it? What can stop it from achieving its potential? So you now have about 30 seconds or so to input your thoughts on that. Okay, so when we get the answer to this question, we'll move on to the main business of the day. But hopefully now you will have got a good idea as to how Mentimeter works. And from now on, it will be open for you to ask your own question. So rather than us asking you questions, you can ask questions that will be answered by the participants today. And as I said, you will be able to see the questions that other people have asked, and you will be able to give them a like, and that will mean that they move up the list, and the question that gets the most likes is at the top of the list of questions. So please use that feature as well if you see a question that you like and you think you would like to hear the answer to it. Okay, so we have again a few words emerging as the dominant words in our word cloud. Politics, and I guess the whole support structure around agriculture is maybe one of the things that's been put forward there. One I think that's very important for us, for Animal Task Force and the plans for the future, is the word knowledge appearing there, that people feel that there's a gap in knowledge, and that's a barrier to reconnecting the two systems. Economics is coming forward there, that obviously the economics are a driver, or the profitability for the farmer is going to be important in the success of this. And okay, so lots of other words, but they're the three that are appearing out of the answers that you're giving us as the three dominant words. So look, that's very interesting to get your perspectives on that, and it forms a good background to the discussions that we will have now for the remainder of the session. Okay, so look, I think we'll move on from that. Thanks very much, Amrit, for organising that. So hopefully now, as I said, you're all well versed in Mentimeter. So to move on with our agenda, I would now like to call on Lucas Vicek to make some opening remarks. Lucas is a member of the Cabinet of the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, and obviously that Commissioner is responsible for the European Green Deal, and his responsibilities cover the Farm to Fork Strategy, agriculture, and the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, as well as the Zero Pollution Initiatives. So Lucas is an economist, graduated from the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague. So Lucas, you're very welcome, and thank you for attending here today. And I'll hand over to you now to make opening comments for the webinar.
Thank you very much, Frank, and good afternoon, everyone. I have looked. First of all, I was very impressed by the by the outcome of the Mentimeter, because it clearly shows that we have that we have to connect some of the issues here, especially in the second, the third poll. This was about the what are the expectations? I mean, why are we doing all of this? And there we saw the words of sustainability, circularity, and resilience. And what would be the showstoppers? It was politics, and then I'm not surprised that since half of the participants are from research and academia, the word knowledge appeared there. And so we have to look for ways how to connect those two groups. So that's what I would like to focus on in my very brief introduction. And thanks very much for inviting me to do that. As I said, about half of the participants, and I checked, there's about 140 people connected at the moment. Half of them are from research and academia. So I'll start with some basic figures, which are probably not going to be unfamiliar to most of you. The figures are that currently almost 70% of land in the EU is somehow associated with animal husbandry. We also know the figure of 10% of GHG emissions from agriculture in the EU, where again livestock is one of the key sources. Is the key source. We also know that agriculture is a key source of methane emissions, and again, livestock there constitutes over 90% of that figure. And we also know that we have a huge problem with nitrates in many member states across the EU. Now, we can, of course, and I'm sure we will, discuss whether what these figures actually mean. We know that in relation to maintenance of grassland, this is not such bad news. We need that, but let me look at it from the perspective of a very recent report of the European Environment Agency that was published in October. Basically, that report assumes, concludes that there are three key pressures on habitats and ecosystems. First is the abandonment of grassland management. Second is use of pesticides, and third is intensive grazing or overgrazing by livestock. I should also point out that the first one, abandonment of grassland management, is the number one by far. So there's clearly it's a huge problem, but there's also a huge scope for opportunity, and I will talk about that in a second. But before I do that, let me also broaden up the topic and the reason why we're here today, and that is, what does all of this lead to? What does it mean? What does it imply? It implies that, and that was, I believe, pointed out in one of the replies. It also means that we import huge amounts of feed. We're very much dependent on the feed that we import, which means that we also cause environmental problems elsewhere and climate problems for the entire planet. What this also means is that the intensive systems that the EA report refers to make food too cheap, and I'm not just talking about meat, but of course it's a big part of it. That leads to the fact that 2/3 of protein that people eat actually comes from meat, which then has consequences on health, etc., etc. It also means that we, as in Europe, we also waste far too much food, about a quarter of that. Now, I promised to speak about opportunities. So all of this is, for me, an opportunity, and that's embedded in the Farm to Fork strategy, which the Commission adopted in May this year. What we need to do is we need to create business cases, and the Farm to Fork, and that should be the objective. Well, I believe it is the objective of this workshop. The farm to fork strategy clearly says that the circular bio-based economy is still largely untapped. There's a huge potential for farmers and especially for the cooperatives to grasp that opportunity and actually make money on this. For example, I'm talking about advanced biorefineries that produce biofertilizers. I'm talking about protein feeds, bioenergy, and biochemicals. Last but not least, the Commission adopted last month the Methane Strategy, where there is a huge potential for production of biogas. Now, we could also partly solve this by regulation, and I take note of the word politics that appeared in the last poll, there we have the farm to fork strategy has promised to deliver a revision of the feed additives regulation at the end of 2021. But we also have the common agricultural policy, which is currently going to be negotiated between the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. And there, I believe, we have a potential to support this transition towards more circular and more resilient and certainly far more sustainable systems through eco schemes, through investments to precision farming, for example. So all that has to be thrown into the bag, and I believe that today we have a very good opportunity, bringing researchers, scientists, policymakers, and business together from both the livestock side and crop side together, and see what a solution can be delivered. Thanks very much. I really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Lucas, and we're very, very glad to have you with us and that you can stay with us for the afternoon. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the presentation of the paper, and the paper is going to be presented jointly by Jean-Louis Perrault, who until yesterday was president of the Animal Task Force and has been for the last 5 years. And his co-presenter is Mark Cornelissen, who is chair of the board of the ETP Plans for the Future. So over to you, Jean-Louis, to begin the presentation.
Well, it's me actually.
You, Mark. Okay, apologies.
Well, we read here the question how to re-implement livestock crop synergies, and I think it was already alluded to progress on this goal comes with quite some complexity. Agriculture in Europe, but also globally, is locked into production flows, but also in economic silos and in other complex socio-political situations with a really geographic dimension. And if we're talking now about this migration, it's truly migration, which basically means that you would like to secure business continuity during this migration. And this comes with a complexity because the players in the value chain often actually operate at very low margins. And this means that a change in offering of products, or a change in procedures, or a change in business approach deals with uncertainty and business risk. And so the question that we have to ask in this webinar is, what is a desirable evolutionary path forward? What kind of additional knowledge gathering, what kind of R&I actions are needed today to de-risk this migration and at the same time deliver those desirable short, mid, and longer term impacts? If I may have the next slide, please. Oops, something not working.
Can you see it?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, thank you. So the work that we are presenting today actually is done through contribution of both the plant ETP and the Animal Task Force. And here in a executive form, you see the main contributors that also have led to the preparation of this webinar today. May I have the next slide? So our starting point actually is that we are totally aware that society starts to see literally live the negative impacts that we have through human action on environment and climate change. And there's also an awareness that agriculture plays a role here. Probably society doesn't understand too well yet actually what the role of agriculture is, and possibly also not that they themselves as a member of the consumer group are part both of the problem and the solution. So there's a communication stream somehow the current damages that are on the shelf. Europe, of course, has offering an enormous, fabulous backwind for change through the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, the protein plan, as Lucas already was referring to, and also the biodiversity strategy. And at the same time, also you see the installment of a risk fund that actually helps to mitigate problems, business risks that actors could have when engaging in this kind of migration. Overall, what we see is that if we want to truly live up to the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy and the Green Deal, there is a pressing need really to rejuvenate the agro-food system as a whole. And this goes further actually than just the farm. It includes the supply chain of the farm as well as the downstream sectors and the relationship with consumers and policymakers. May I have the next slide, please? So the purpose of the webinar and also of the policy brief really is to get to those research goals and policy recommendations that aim at improving the sustainable food production, really at the interplay of the plant and livestock sectors. And this is important to emphasize because of this limited scope. Of course, the topics that we bring today to the table are just a subset of the R&I initiatives that will be necessary to enable this transition to sustainable agriculture. If I may have the next slide, please. So the methodology that we're following is actually a very stepwise one. Already 2 years ago, we sat together with a broad panel of experts from very different directions, people that actually are in the crop field, people that are in the animal genetics field, and businesses. The key finding actually of that meeting for myself was that those two groups don't actually typically discuss with each other and don't align. And so this is a missing link in the story. If ever we would like to improve the flow of innovation in this field, we need to connect the different value chain participants, but also the different innovation streams. And the method that we are basically following was work out a concerted view, published this in a position paper that happened last year. And then we had some sessions with DG Agri, DG RTD that were very valuable and where the first thinking was challenged, and that actually led to I think, a further improved and more strategic perception of what we could be doing in this. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Jean-Louis.
Okay, Mark. So can I have the next slide, please? So how we did get there with such a problem? Indeed, the Green Revolution was based on intensification of production. So the total slide, please. So we intensify the farming system with huge amount of inputs. We specialize the farming system, but worse, we specialize the region. We produce livestock in some region and crop in other region with no connection at all. And the sum of specialization and intensification raised a lot of progress in terms of productivity. It's clear, and it was the objective at the beginning, but in the same time, some disadvantage appears. And this way of thinking is largely based on linear approach. And we have some problem in the crop system, probably not enough diverse crop, and we have much more monoculture. We have a huge amount of nitrogen fertilizer and pesticides. In the livestock side, we have high level of nitrogen input with a lot of problem in some area. We have greenhouse gas emission and methane emission in particular, welfare issue, antimicrobial resistance, and so on. So, and some limits are both for crop and livestock. For example, the loss of soil fertility, the loss of biodiversity, the degradation of ecosystem in general. So huge negative effect, and it's clear that we cannot continue on the same road. Please, the next slide. So the way of progress we imagine is to have the next slide. Sorry, there is. No, yes, that's one. We need to reconnect the plant, the animal, and the soil. Don't forget the soil, which are part of the food system all together. The objective is to produce more healthy food, reduce greenhouse gas emission, remove CO2 from the atmosphere with the soil carbon storage, recovering biodiversity, avoiding nitrogen and phosphorus losses, increasing efficiency in resource use, and recycling biomass between the different sectors. To achieve this objective and to reduce damage which are far beyond the planetary boundaries in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus losses, biodiversity losses, and climate change, we need crop diversification. And crop diversification has a lot of possibilities to facilitate biological control of plant pests and reduce pesticide, to increase nitrogen and protein autonomy, thanks to huge use of legumes, to provide new feed source for the animals with intercrops, mixed crop, dual purpose crops, agroforestry to some extent, and contribute to adaptation to climate change. And in the same time, livestock make easier crop diversification thanks to the ability of livestock to use a broad diversity of biomass, which is not the case for our food. So livestock are able to use a much high level of biomass, and livestock, in the same time, provide organic fertilizer to manage soil fertility and to reduce emission linked to the synthesis and the use of mineral fertilizer. So we need a system approach, and we need to shift. And probably it is one of the most important difficulties we have to tackle, to focus from a shift from efficiency of a single product to efficiency of the whole system. And it is really a new way of thinking. To consider governance, socio-economic arrangement, capacity building that are an issue for sustainable recycling biomass in agricultural system, and to deal with the interdependencies between production, ecosystem, and policy. So some challenge for the CAP in the future. The next slide, please. To build this kind of new circularity, we need to consider the diversity of European sun climatic and economical condition. This is illustrated in this slide. This map of Europe shows a typology of describing the diversity of European farming system using two criteria. The first is the share of permanent grassland in the use of agricultural area, and the second is animal density on the territory. 7 types of farming system has been defined like this, from region with a high animal density and no grassland to region with no livestock, no grassland, and specialized cropping system, and a lot of intermediate. But even if a given region, which is shown in the cone, we can have a wide diversity of farming system between farms, representing from some mixed farming systems, specialized in livestock production, specialized in crop production, even in a small territories. So the scale and the term of recoupling can be highly variable. Crop and livestock systems should become more integrated at farm level or between neighboring farms with arable and livestock rotation at the regional level. And we can also think between region reconnection for the strategic use of manure, strategic use of byproduct from the crop sectors. So the recoupling is of particular interest in the context of development of organic farmings, because here we have a crucial issue in the requirement of nitrogen and phosphorus for the crops. And livestock and crops is a key element for organic farming also. So this is the global vision about the theoretical, at least, interest of reconnecting the different sectors, plants, livestock, and soils. And the goal is to achieve climate change mitigating, circular, resource efficient of agro-food system. And you see on this slide some main output we can envisage. It's really a very new way of thinking agriculture with a circular and efficient food production system driven by proper evaluation of impact of agro-ecosystem. So we need performance tools to evaluate the impact. Less use of fertilizer and pesticides, less use of antibiotics, move to carbon neutral agriculture, increase biodiversity, surely less European protein imports coming from deforestation in particular, reducing water scarcity, which is a big issue in southern country at least, and more healthier soil and healthier ecosystem. Just to show you an example, which can illustrate this, the next slide, please, which can illustrate the reconnection. It is what is the link between livestock and pesticide, for example. Here in this slide, I show you a large-scale experiment which was conducted in France with 3,000 farms. And this slide shows that considering the use of pesticides, we show that this use of pesticide is lower in mixed farming system than in specialized cropping system. The number of treatment per crops is 2.3 in mixed farming system and 3.7 in crop farm. This difference is partly expressed by the more diverse rotation used in the mixed farming system because farmers need a lot of different crops to feed livestock. Probably, and also we cannot exclude that these farmers are fewer requirements on the cleanness of their crop indeed. On the second graph, you see that the blue points are specialized cropping system and the orange point are the mixed farming system. You see that not only mixed farming system use less pesticides, so the orange point are quite near the origin on x-axis, but also they are in a lower position on the y-axis. It means that the rate of decline of pesticide use is more important in mixed farming system than in a specialized cropping system. So this slide is just to illustrate which kind of link we can have between different worlds, which is the world of crop and pesticide and the world of livestock. So next slide, please. So how we can make progress? To make a progress, the first is to have a tool able to track, to evaluate the progress which are currently obtained. Life cycle analysis is clearly a quite interesting analytical approach to qualify agriculture performance, and it is a well-spread use, so it's okay. But this method has some flaw, especially when we want to consider the reconnection of the livestock and the crop and soil. First, life cycle analysis has a narrow perspective of agricultural system. They focus on reduced impact per unit of product. And the method favors intensive system and not at all organic system, for example. The carbon footprint of organic product is always much higher than the carbon footprint of intensive product. By focusing on product and not on system, this method gives a very simplistic view of agriculture and try to oppose livestock and crops. Secondly, the livestock life cycle analysis struggle to comprehensively assess some performance that are critical on the long term, as soil fertility, soil erosion, biodiversity evolution, toxicity impact of pesticides, biodiversity, link between biodiversity and human health. So all these challenges are at the connection between the livestock and the crop and are not yet considered in the life cycle analysis. So we need to make progress in life cycle analysis, as is shown in the next slides. The next one is just an example to explain what are the limits of the life cycle analysis today. The first limit is what we need to think about the way of expressing the result. If we consider the functional units, you see on this slide with the clear blue that the carbon footprint, for example, of fruits is lower than carbon footprints of milk or pig product. But if we consider as unit not the kg of product, but the kilocalorie of those products, you see that the carbon footprint of fruits and legumes is higher than the carbon footprint of milk. So again, the vision of the world could differ according to the unit, and it is a problem. The second one, as an example of the flow of life cycle analysis, is the graph shown in this slide, where we compare on a long-term experiment, the supply of nitrogen thanks to mineral fertilizer or a mixture of mineral fertilizer and organic fertilizer, solid manure from ruminant indeed. And you see that the soil carbon increase in one situation with solid manure, but not at all with mineral nitrogen. And this phenomena is not taken into account in the life cycle analysis. In the same way, life cycle analysis doesn't capture property emerging at the landscape level. And here you have a photo showing buffer zone, humid zone. These zones are very important for biodiversity. They are maintained in good health thanks to well-managed grazing ruminants. Again, it's not taken into account in the life cycle analysis. And in fact, at last, life cycle analysis consider all land use and all feed of animals as a single origin, but indeed, we need to consider the role of marginal land compared to arable land, and the role of edible food or food which is used as feed, and feed which is not edible as human food. So a lot of points which are not yet well considered in the life cycle analysis. The next slide. So we need to improve the life cycle analysis to demonstrate the progress thanks to the reconnecting of livestock and crop sectors. The second recommendation we have in our document, vision paper, is to optimize the synergy in circularity. The first step of the development is we need to think about a master plan. The challenge is to anticipate the required innovation, but that make it possible to take advantage of this reconnection. It's not only simple to say we need to reconnect, but how we can reconnect, what can be the advantage, where are the trade-offs, and how we can solve them. The objective, the purpose of this master plan is to develop an integrated approach of the crop and the livestock production to offer new option for land use, for crop and byproduct utilization, and to imagine new circularities, maintaining business continuity. We need also to think about the stability, the crop yield stability, which will be a very huge challenge in the future when we consider the climate change. It is also required for this master plan to assess which combination of crop and which type of animal we need in the future, taking into account the interaction between genetics and environment. This recommendation number 2 has indeed divided in 3 sub-recommendations. The first one, 2A, is to identify and develop new innovative cropping system, and the development of a panel of crops allowing for permanent soil cover, which is very important, and together with a strategy of maximizing yield per crop, we will be able to maximize food production per hectare. It means that new way of thinking of circularity is not necessarily linked to a decrease in productivity in itself. It's just a change in the type of biomass we will produce and use. Second point is the cultivation of multiple sources of biomass, such as grassland, cash crop, intercrops, new kind of crops, and especially legumes, will contribute to the diversification of crop rotation with a lot of benefits for soil, for biodiversity notably, and for increasing European protein autonomy. In this system, livestock will play a crucial, critical role by adding value to this biomass, most of them being not edible as human food, and by providing organic fertilizers and trying to solve the problem of excess of nitrogen we have, and to reduce the import of phosphorus as a fertilizer at European level. So we need to develop, and it will be a difficulty, innovative value chain using this kind of circularity at the level of region, at the level of each farm, or between farms. Yes, the next slide, please. So again, to illustrate this point, is what new interplay between crop and grassland and livestock can occur. Indeed, we need a large diversity of crop and forages to feed livestock. So it is a way to increase cultivated biodiversity at field level. But if we consider at a global level, landscape level, permanent grassland are essential to maintain the native flora and to avoid development of brush. I should remember that 50% of endemic plant species in Europe are grassland plants. And at the landscape level, as shown in this figure, ruminant can contribute to create biodiversity thanks to landscape mosaic, and which are appreciated for the tourists, but also they provide habitat for the wild fauna. And again, in Europe, 50% of the birds require grassland as part of their life cycle, as for nidification or for feeding feed. So, as said by Luca, grassland is really important in this land use, but we need to take care that grassland should be well managed, not overgrazing or not undergrazing, and it is one of the difficulties we have to solve. Okay, so Mark.
Mark, we cannot hear you.
We can't hear you, Mark.
And now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, well, if I put it on mute, you don't hear me. That's what I just discovered. No, so with the advance of genetics and genomics of crops and livestock, it's becoming feasible to align the genetics of the crops and livestock and to improve animal health and reduce the environmental footprint, both of feed and livestock production. If we wish to open up such an avenue, then knowledge on some topics needs to be advanced, and we wrote it down here. On the animal side, you would like to understand better the genetics behind the animal's dependencies on feed requirements and possibly optimize this. On the crop side, you should understand what is needed to tailor the feed performance features of crops to the current and future feed requirements of livestock. And despite that this is easily written up, the knowledge behind it is actually largely lacking and would need really in-depth understanding of what is critical here. This actually argues for a different approach to pre-competitive research and the interplay that is done with the users of this pre-competitive information. And in general, what we believe is that to contribute to the EU Green Deal, we need a rejuvenation and a rethinking of the agricultural ecosystem. And that includes academia, startups, breeding and R&D companies, the farm supply industry, farmers, and even downstream probably. And this kind of ecosystem shift is applying both then to crops and to livestock. And just to exemplify the point, I would like to show a picture linked to the crop improvement cycle that could be run differently. May I have next slide, please? What you see here is a very schematic outline actually of how public research interfaces with the private initiatives. And it's clear that in an ecosystem like this, with the Green Deal and behind, you would actually see innovation coming out that addresses environmental sustainability, impacts of increased weather volatility and climate change, associated pests and diseases actually that you see developing, the European Protein Plan, the development of more healthy and nutritious food, and an enablement of the bioeconomy. So in principle, a vehicle that you see here, which I will explain in a few words later on, should allow you to leverage knowledge into action points and offer farmers actually options to improve their economic structurally through product branding and traceability. So the concept is not actually complex, it's pretty simple. It basically talks about delivering output in a format of use for the receiving party, something that doesn't really is working today too well. The KPIs of the actors actually involved in such a chain are not really targeted to this. And novelty is also the feedback loop and a holistic integration of data coming from any aspect of agriculture. That actually means plant science, microbial, soil, agronomy, but also robotization, machine learning, modeling, weather, climate disciplines. In principle, that's the setting of the knowledge development and the enablement to extract starting points for a next round of breeding, or starting points if there's a feedback flow for a new round of science. In addition, in Europe and also elsewhere in the world, we have a vast amount of material that in principle could be fed into such a system, provided that people actually would derive from there the information value in the appropriate format. The steering of such a vehicle can be done to existing vehicles, like for instance in crops variety testing. You could actually think of setting a particular progressive sustainability standards, say for instance input requirements or water use requirements in a particular setting in Europe, that actually allow breeders to direct their work, make improvements, and in this way actually create a value chain of relevance. So the critical success factor in a concept like this is actually the alignment of the key performance indicators, as I said before, of the different stakeholders, incentives to participate, especially in the beginning, an open innovation attitude, common benchmark like Jean-Louis was referring to, so that you can actually explain that you're better than before with your opportunity, smartly located research field stations, and something that often is overlooked, a financially self-supporting data center that actually has dedicated academic satellites and an end-user platform. Now, to make something like this workable and sustainable, you need to think about appropriate business models and governance concepts to deal with data ownership, intellectual property, and very likely also very smart data stewardship concepts. But we believe actually that through several rounds of trial and maybe even in smaller scale settings, you can find actually a best compromise between stakeholders' interests. And we believe that thoughts like this actually should inspire to develop working models in the future where the overall flow of innovation to the market gets improved. May I have the next slide, please? Yes. So the development of biorefineries to maximize European self-sufficiency. As already said by Jean-Louis, I mean, in the coming years, we may expect major changes in land use and also how the land is being treated. And this, of course, is driven by actions to mitigate climate change, to restore soil health and biodiversity, to enable healthier diets, greater protein self-sufficiency. I think also the energy transition is very important because it will reduce the demand for biofuels, offers options for land use change, and actually also may further propel thereby the bioeconomy. 2050 farming, that will be a different world, and you may expect an enormous diversity in crops, other kind of rotations, also with livestock, other practices, other value chains, tapping into the agricultural output and other business models. And critical in this entire story will be the ability to produce the desired pre-products in the desired volumes, in the desired quality, with workable, ideally competitive economics. Refinery in this story will play a critical role, both in the production and in the circularity approaches, and actually has shorter, mid, and longer term impacts. And I think especially Jean-Louis can reveal insights in some of the shorter term impacts here.
Yeah. So, for example, we think that technology and biotechnology will help us to make progress. This is an example about the use of manure. Today, this is a figure of quantity of nitrogen we have on the market to feed the soil and to produce crop. Part came from mineral fertilizer and part from manure. But indeed, the use of mineral nitrogen consumes a lot of energy for its synthesis and application on land. Each ton of synthetic nitrogen applied also costs more or less 1 ton of fossil energy equivalent. So it is a major source of greenhouse gas emission with N2O in addition to the CO2 for the production. But in the same time, we have nitrogen, and sometimes in some area too much nitrogen from manure to well manage it. In the future, today in the agricultural sectors, more or less 55% of greenhouse gas of the agricultural sector came from methane and 43% from N2O. So it means that we claim a lot about methane, but we don't need to forget N2O and N2O mitigation for the agricultural sector. So when we look at the quantity of nitrogen available, we can think that we have some advantage to replace mineral fertilizer by well-managed manure and fertilizer, organic fertilizer. The avenue of improvement are indeed more or less well known. The first, and it's to limit nitrogen loss after animal excretion and before land application. We have a lot of techniques. It's required investment to apply these techniques in terms of storage, spreading with low emitting material, and so on. So it's a classical way of progress. But we have another way of progress thanks to biorefinery of manure. From manure, it's possible to extract nitrogen and phosphorus to produce certified fertilizer and export this fertilizer to other area. A lot of cooperative of industry in Europe are able to manage this kind of strategy. We can also use composting of manure, and composting make it possible to obtain a hygienist and deodorized product, which can be transferred to other region, for example, for intensive farming system to region where we have only crop, to enrich the soil with organic matter in the safe way. And we can also, and it is clearly the case today, to produce biogas with manure, and with we have a byproduct, which is a very good nitrogen fertilizer. So on this example of manure, we have here the way we can imagine to, thanks to circularity, to improve the use of nitrogen at European level, while reducing greenhouse gas emission. And for you, Mark, the last one.
Thank you. So I would like to spend a few words actually on the value chain concept and what kind of approach actually we maybe have to look at before we know what is a smart way of acting. If you just make a brief recap, I mean, centrally we can see the farmer that actually is confronted with a lot of uncertainty if you think about it, and even about personal things like autonomy, independence, job satisfaction, because what he's facing ahead is a growing issue about securing yield stability from the activities that he is executing. And at the same time, there is a kind of desire to work with fewer active ingredients to control disease and pest. deliver actually environmental and societal benefits. And with this, actually, he sees that he needs inputs. And he gets those from the retailer side, he gets them, and he gets them also from the supply chain. But both actually are power pressures. I mean, the retailer will be leveraging the consumer intelligence and actually will set up short value chains to have identity preserved goods grown and cultivated under particular regimes. The supply inner chain is pushing forward innovation that actually will help the farmer, but it's in part knowledge based, combined with actually new offerings that include other kind of crops, other economic practices, other kind of equipment, robotization, handy tools to actually have new farm management tools. This is the kind of complexity the farmer is being put in. And so bottom line, he is engaging in practices where there's uncertainty about the value he can create by changing practices and the value share that he actually may be receiving when he actually engages. And so this by itself puts a kind of complex situation where ideally people start to think in a time order what needs to happen first and what needs to happen in parallel to allow such a migration. I think what is very important to recognize, I think Jean-Louis already named it with the LCA discussion, depending on where you are in Europe and on what piece of ground you're executing your profession as a farmer, you will have another intrinsic LCA benchmark, depending on what kind of land you're growing actually. And so there's a difference between starting to measure the environmental impact through LCA, the communication that you use in the value chain, and the communication concept that goes towards the consumer because of which you can steer buying behavior. And this is a complexity that is to be developed in parallel and where all of us are in a learning period. And I put here the word learning period forward because what is critical is that we get a kind of grace period where maybe a supply chain or another actor invites farmers to participate, wants to understand actually what is being done makes sense or not, and where the participation is almost as important as the outcome of what is being measured and done. And this kind of grace period will be very critical, I think, for the different players in the value chain to assume their market position and their operational excellence, if you would call it like that, in line with their vision of their business, be it a retailer or a processor, a farmer or a supply chain player. So I think what is a component that also was touched upon, I think, by Lucas and indirectly by Jean-Louis already also, farmers will be embracing automatically any innovation linked to sustainability if it goes together with cost innovation. The operating costs of the farm go down with a maintained kind of productivity. You also will embrace activities that allow them to raise productivity with the same environmental impact, as environmental impact is something that you measure per kilogram of product output. But the story gets very different when we get into innovation that actually needs to be there because we put particular thresholds depending on biodiversity or on soil health, etc., that actually will come with an extra cost. And in those circumstances, of course, the value created by participating needs to be secured. And this means that you need to have a kind of branding in place and a language between peers, farmers, between peer suppliers, between peer retailers, etc., that can be used as a kind of communication channel towards the consumer. And you need to have matrices in place that are fair and honest and actually easily understandable. So I just, for the sake of time, actually, I will stop here, but this kind of topic is highly complex. It's not obvious at all what is the better way forward at the moment. I see all kinds of initiatives around us that help this transition. And I think the key point is that we are in a learning period and that we need a sector-wide alignment here in order to progress. And my question is, where does that alignment take place at the moment? Thank you for your attention there.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Louis and Mark. That was really interesting. And sorry, Jean-Louis, is there one more slide?
Well, this slide actually we have put it as a closure. What we tried to list up here are the obvious angles where we see there's a benefit of integrating integrated farming. In the Q&A that we will be running, but also in the panel discussion, it would be absolutely great if you could get inspiration from your side as well, where you see actually space for action.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so again, Jean-Louis and Mark, thank you very much for your very clear outline of the policy brief. I think you have given us lots of food for thought, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions. So already there are a lot of questions on Mentimeter. So could I ask you, if you wish, to go in and see which questions you like the best, and you see the little thumbs up symbol. So if you press that, it adds a like to that question, and in that way we can see which are the questions that the audience thinks are most relevant to be asked, in case we cannot get to every question. At this stage, unless there are any questions for clarification around the paper, we won't take questions yet. We'll just move to the panel discussion. So Amrit, is there anything that needs to be clarified, or will we move on to the panel discussion?
So there's just one quick question of clarification, actually to Lucas Vicek, about which report he was referencing. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, Lucas, could you perhaps add that into the chat so that everybody could see which report it was, if you have it with you.
Okay, thank you, Amrit. So that was a report you referenced, Lucas, that was published about a month ago. Maybe you can just add the reference to that. Okay, so we'll move on to the panel discussion, and we have two panelists, and they're each going to just give a very brief commentary or statement, and then we will have some discussion. So our first panelist is Arnaud Bouzin, who's Deputy Secretary General of FEEDBAC, the European Feed Manufacturers Federation. So Arnaud, if you could take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation for this webinar today, and special thanks to Mark and to Jean-Louis for the excellent presentation, because it's really a masterpiece of work that has been done there, and it's for me an illustration of what we can call a symbiosis between livestock and crops in support of sustainable food systems. Maybe symbiosis is not the right word to use, but you forgive me, I'm not a scientist, but you have, I think, understood the sense and meaning behind. So the organization I work for, which is FEFAC, is a European Federation of Manufacturers of Feed for Food Producing Animals. So we have members in 28 European countries, and our members are delivering every day feed to livestock farmers. So when I listen to Mark and Jean-Louis, it seems obvious that the feeding dimension is really central in what we are discussing today. The plants feed the animals feed the plants, and this is in itself a perfect example of circularity. But farming is not about feeding plants to feed animals to feed plants. It's primarily to feed humans. And then the challenge of circularity in agriculture is to integrate humans in the circle. We can call this maybe one nutrition, because at the end of the day, we are using all living organisms are using the same basic nutrients. The difference is in the way these nutrients are delivered and their biological value. And our objective there in the farm-to-fork context must be to manage all these nutrients in an optimized way, and taking advantage of the complementarity and the diversity of the nutritional requirements rather than considering only the competition aspect. And next to animals, crops, humans, you can certainly also include in the loop nutrition of insects, nutrition of algae, nutrition of microbes. These will contribute to so close the circle. Just an illustration of what can be done in an integrated way between plants and animals. There is, and that's well known, a huge potential to improve the nutritional value of the food, of the plants, but also of the co-product. It's not just about improving what goes to food. It's also thinking about the co-product and how to improve its nutritional value for animals. And maybe on the feed side, we can also start considering how to improve the nutritional value of manure. Because we have been working until now only in the sense of minimizing nutrient losses, but not that much in optimizing these in the manure. So we are conscious that we have an important role to play in the transition to more sustainable food systems. And we released 2 months ago a charter, a sustainability charter, where we have included and presented ambitions that we believe can contribute also to the Green Deal objectives. And when I read and when I listen to Mark and Jean-Louis, I can find a number of things in their paper which should help us also succeed in our commitments, in our ambitions. And that has to do, for example, with our ambition to contribute to carbon neutrality of livestock production. We know that there are different ways to reduce greenhouse emissions, and one of these is to address the emissions of methane, and there are plants which can, like linseed, for example, which can contribute to reduce enteric fermentation. When it comes to nutrient deficiency, Mark mentioned the degradation of proteins in the rumen that can be reduced. That's an important point. Precision feeding is also another. And the increased use of non-human edible resources, that was an important point mentioned by Jean-Louis as well. So there are also some potential there to also improve the nutritional value of this co-product. And proteins, just to finish with that, Lucas mentioned the imports from third countries of proteins. And indeed, it's also our ambition to improve our responsible sourcing, as we call it. And that, when it comes to protein, means maybe producing a bit more proteins in Europe. So using more protein produced in Europe. But for that, we need enhanced breeds. We need better yields. We need better protein quality. So this is an area of improvement. And in the meantime, we are not just waiting for this. We are also taking action to minimize the impact on the environment of imports of proteins from third countries. And we have our guidelines, our soil sourcing guidelines already for a number of years in force. So these are things which are also important for us. But in conclusion, in a few words, what I would just mention that this paper, this policy brief that was presented today for me is an excellent foundation for more sustainable food systems. And we can only recommend the EU Commission to carefully consider this when designing research programs, but also to not forget food safety, because we have also a number of achievements in recent years in terms of improvement of safety, and we should be careful that whatever we do now will not compromise this. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnaud, for that and for your endorsement and praise of the paper. Our second panelist is Max Schulman from COPA-COGECA. And Max, I'll hand over the floor to you.
Thank you, Frank. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Well, very good. No, thank you. I mean, I think that Mark, Jean-Louis, you had a very good presentation here, brought up some of the challenges that what we are facing when we look at the agriculture sector here today in Europe, and looking at them from 2 points. One, through the animal side, and how to be able to connect then again the arable sector and the animals together. I'm here today representing mainly the arable sector. I'm a farmer from Finland. I used to have beef cattle until 2001, so I know quite well what the challenges are when it comes down to animals as well inside the production. One thing is for sure, these two have to be able to find better synergies than what we have today. But we already have seen and heard in the first presentation that we have gone from an older system of mixed farm. From mixed farm, we have moved into more specialized farms. And then the specialized farms again have found their own best regions where they have been able to grow and stay. So we have now farms that are specialized, animals and arable. This is a very bluntly said. For sure, we do also have mixed farms. But on top of that, we also see that we have these farms located, not mixed in between each other, but we also see that there are regions where you have heavy amount and big amounts of livestock, like we could already see earlier on in the map shown by Jean-Louis. And then we have certain regions where we see that the domination is actually on the crop side. What we need to do, we have to be able to look at the system where we, instead of having mixed farms, we should have a mix of farms in the regions that would be able to work in synergy in producing both feed and food for the EU citizens, but also for specialized use and also for the exports. This is one way how we should be able to at least come in and look more at the circularity and circular economy as well, but also looking at the environment without having to transport both nutrients, but also the feed around in between places. So I think that we have to think about this and still remember one thing there. One size fits all will never work inside Europe. We have also regions where you most probably have much better off being mainly on the plant-based side. And we do also have areas where you most probably will be much better off with grazing cattle, for instance, where you have more than permanent grasslands, and also land that actually will benefit from being under grazing, under permanent grassland. But we also have big regions where we actually can do these kind of a mix in between. For the arable sector, what is then also needed is that we have to maintain and make sure that we have a farm income. We get our livelihood from the production unit, the hectare and the hectare of land and the soil in that hectare. So we do take care of our soils. I don't see, and I don't think that there are many arable farmers that do not take care of their soil and their land. For sure, you can become better in doing it. Absolutely. You can find new innovative crops to be able to grow there. You can have catch crops. You can have their cover crops. But this also means that we need to have good varieties. We need very good and very precise plant breeding to be able to do this. And we need this plant breeding to fit in to the region, to the member states where you are growing. So one sector that we at least are looking into now is what can the plant breeding do for us? And I was very, very happy when I saw that even the Nobel Prize Committee did actually realize that we do have a possibility in the CRISPR-Cas gene editing side. I don't say that this will actually solve all the problems, but this could be one possibility to go into plant breeding. We do need in Europe new crops. We need protein crops more into our plant rotation of today. We import a lot of them, we have heard. Why not grow them here? We also have to look then into the policies. Why do we not grow them here? Do we have something already made up long since where it has been divided the markets in the world? Who is focusing more on cereals and who is focusing more on the proteins? Here we come into the market-driven approach. We also have to maintain and make sure that whatever we do when it comes into this, we also have the markets with us. Like Arnaud was saying, they need a steady flow of raw material for the feed industry. They would like to look into European feed and feed components that are more on the protein side, but then they need a steady flow. They need it to be there just in time. We also, as grain farmers, arable farmers, we need also there a steady market for the products that we grow. When it comes down to policies, whatever is put in place, you have to remember a few things. One thing is that to change the system, how we are growing already on farm level takes time and adaptation. We need to keep that in mind because we also need to do investments. So there has to be an income part in there. We have to be able to stay competitive in the market, but we also have to maintain a farm income. Very important. Second big thing is also, once you put a policy in place, please do not change it in the middle. These are just some small thoughts that I would like to bring up now into the discussion. But otherwise, I would say that we have here the ingredients has been presented to us quite well. What and how the synergies can be done, what we can find from them. We need technology, we need smart farming, we need precision farming in here. But on top of that, we need to make sure that there is the time and also then the money to invest into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max, for again very thoughtful response to the paper. Just before we'll open the discussion to the questions coming through Mentimeter in a few moments, but just maybe to follow up on one or two things that yourself and Arnoud said, and maybe to bring Lucas into the discussion as well. You mentioned, Max, just maybe to go to you first, that you know, there used to be a mix of farms in the region, and that we used to have mixed farms, and that we can't revert. We're not going to be able to reverse that now. You are not going to get back into beef cattle on your farm, or very unlikely. So if we can't do that, you said we need a mix of farms in the region. But again, is that feasible? Is it feasible to, you know, reintroduce livestock into regions that are predominantly cropping regions, or vice versa?
That's a very good question, because this usually means that the investments has been done already on the slaughterhouses or the dairies, etc., already on other regions. This needs for sure also that the whole, you know, the full chain will also have to take part of this and redirect their investments into regions so that they would be able then to build up these kind of a mix of farms. You can for sure do it in smaller scales close to the regions where you already have this infrastructure in place. But it is not easy. But that's why we also need to make sure that once you start this kind of a push to make a change, you also have the time span in place. We do not say it's a 1 or 2 year. 10 years is a very short time. 20, 30 years starts to become feasible to do these kind of things. So we have to keep this in mind right away when we even start the discussion about new possibilities and policies being put in place. For my sake, why I did quit with beef cattle was that the main slaughterhouse moved 300 kilometers north from me. And that's it. I mean, already there, the transport of the animals and all of these, I thought about it and I said, that's it. No, I will not do it.
Okay, very good. And Arnoud, you mentioned at the end of your contribution, you know, potential issues around safety for humans who eat the food, that whether it's crop or livestock. Do you want to expand on what you mean there, or what concerns you have in relation to, you know, linking crops and livestock and how that might impinge on food safety? Just unmute your microphone. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I mentioned this, and that's maybe something that is not let's say reflected in the paper, in the brief paper. That whatever we are doing is based on the assumption that the safety status that we have in Europe is for granted, but it's not for granted, and it was achieved based on what is what you could qualify as traditional production systems. And what we are seeing now is that there are ambitions in the Green Farm to Fork, and some of these ambitions have maybe the potential to improve safety, but it may also have the potential to decrease safety. But we don't know much about this, and that's something which is really important for us to. And in particular, when it comes to the discussion that we have today and the link with the plants, when just taking mycotoxins, this is something which is more and more problematic to manage for the chain. It's problematic to manage for the producer, for the farmers, because they feel a bit short in terms of methods to control mycotoxin occurrence, and down in the chain we have also problems to manage this risk as well. We are short of measures to do that. But what we can see that if you consider that mycotoxin tend to increase in occurrence, that's a trend today, that the trend is that they concentrate more in co-products of the food processing industry, and that as a feed industry we're expected to use more of these co-products, then you may wonder, well, okay, what am I doing now, and what should I do? And that's, I think, something just to point to the conclusions that the Council drew, the European Council drew a few days ago, that for the farm-to-fork strategy, that there should be a thorough and scientific sound impact assessment being performed. And I can only recommend the Commission, among the impacts to be assessed, that they include the impact on safety.
Okay, thank you for that. And Lucas, I might ask you if you want to make any comment on the paper presented by Jean-Louis and Mark, but also there was a question, and well, Max alluded to the need in Europe for new crops and for biotechnology, and that CRISPR-Cas may have a role in terms of developing crops that, you know, might be better suited to European conditions and give better yields of protein and so on. And there was a question on the Mentimeter about the Commission's attitude. Amrit, can you pull up that question, and we might just deal with that when Lucas comes in as well. But Lucas, first of all, did you want to make any response to the paper at this stage, or any comment on the paper?
Thanks very much, Frank. No, I think everything has been said very well. I will perhaps go straight to the questions that have been asked on Mentimeter and follow up on the discussion that's just taken place now. On the, I think that the question was really on the what is called the new genomic techniques. I saw that question in the Q&A on Zoom. The farm to fork is very clear on that. We are conducting a study on the request of the European Council, and that is going to be made available in 2021, and we'll take next steps based on that analysis, because that's what. Because we need to work with evidence. So that is one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is on the impacts of farm to fork and the impact assessments. That's absolutely correct, and we're very committed to put forward impact assessments for any legislation that is going to come through. The example is with the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive, where we have prepared the inception impact assessment, and we are already working on the impact assessment. But I also want to broaden up the issue a little bit, and I want to suggest that the targets and the efforts that are embedded in the farm to fork strategy aim to ensure a transition for European agriculture. They try to ensure that the food chain transits to something that is more sustainable and more resilient. So I'm just going back to the buzzwords that came out of the Mentimeter. What is clear is that even if we did not prepare impact assessments, even if we did not put forward all these targets, what is clear is that something needs to change, because the alternative is continue business as usual, which of course is not something that is possible to go on with. And here I'm talking about all the environmental degradation. I'm talking about climate change. None of these issues are going to go away, and the more we wait with the change that needs to be done, the more costly and more painful it is actually going to be for farmers, and more costly for consumers as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So look, now I'm going to bring Jean-Louis and Mark back into the discussion, and we will take questions and from the Mentimeter, and if any of the panelists wish to ask any question or jump into any of the answers, please do. Jean-Louis or Mark, is there anything you want to add to the discussion that we've had so far? and some of the comments that Arnu or Max or Lucas have made.
I would like to make a point, and that actually is maybe an answer to some of the elements that were raised. But what Max was referring to is that the switching cost for the sector needs to happen in a smart way. It needs to be managed for the individual player, but also in a coordinated fashion from a value chain perspective, so that a particular product indeed flows through that value chain. And that somehow comes back to the fact that we should have in Europe, to help this transit, a kind of ecosystem dashboard where actually you are aware about what is being changed and migrated where, what needs additional risk funding and support, and where actually you can draw lessons from what happens there in reality in a particular business setting, and maybe use that elsewhere in Europe. And the other element that I think I picked up is that there could be an enormous value in getting an overarching view, holistically systems view, maybe like Max was saying, about actually the land use option space, linked to a kind of LCA-based master plan where you understand what actually is being done best where, and where actually you have this sweet spot where you would like to start blending again livestock with crop cultivation, because from a business perspective this may work then better. What I also see, and I saw that in the Mentimeter outcome, of course, barriers are that actually have specialized actions that actually are a business by itself, and somehow you would like to merge those and connect. And then the question is, who's the owner, how's the value chain interaction, and how do you manage actually value creation? So I think this is a complexity also that needs to be demoed somehow.
Yes, I think that I fully agree with the comment of the panelists. I want to stress about one aspect, which is food safety. We don't stress too much on food safety during the oral presentation. It is in the vision paper, and I think it's a crucial issue, especially when we are thinking about exchange between farmers in a given region, how we can ensure safety of the product, what are the legal aspects behind. So we need research on legal aspects, not only on agronomy, but also on juridical point of view, economical point of view, and political point of view. We probably know more or less well where we want to go, but what is the way to go, what is the road, and we clearly need some political incentive and political tools to help farmers to move on a new direction, because it will be very, very difficult. If we haven't done reconnection in the recent past, it's because we have a huge economical issue to solve behind.
And just to follow up on that point.
Economy of scale and economy of agglomeration.
Just to follow up on that point, like there have been, the drivers for the specialization and intensification that we have seen have been the economics of production systems and farmers trying to optimize the production system to the region in which they were living in. And those drivers are they're hard to reverse. They will need strong policy if you wish to overcome those drivers. So I'm just wondering, do we actually need physical co-location of livestock and cropping in the one region, or can we have virtual co-location, so that individual farmers develop relationships? They may not be in the same region, but they have a strong relationship for provision of feed, from a crop farmer to a livestock farmer who might be 150 kilometers away, and for return of the manure. Is that a feasible option? And Max wishes to come into that as well. So Max, do you want to take that first?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very good question, and I think it is totally feasible. We do actually forget that we should also look into what digitalization can bring in here. You can put, for instance, grain to be sold on a digital platform where farmer-to-farmer trade can actually find itself. You can actually not only trade the grain itself, but it can made also into production contract to produce things, etc. And there you also would be able to make the manure, like it was said here, into a commodity that will actually find certain type of value. It can even be part of the old way of the barter or exchange in between manure against grains or against feed. It could be done, and this is the digitalization will bring these possibilities into us. We forget that we have a big technological leap on its way, and the farming system, we are, even if we are a very old profession, we are by far not old-fashioned at all.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, as well as grain transfers, that growing of forage crops on a crop farm, because if we want to increase the diversity of crops on the tillage farms, we need to change or bring in new crops. Arno, you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, just to a reflection. I think there are already a number of regions where we have mixed farming systems, or as pointed by Max, mix of specialized farms, let's say, in the same regions. I think that we forget maybe today that the vast majority of the feed ingredients that are used in feed are local. We are talking about grains, but we're also talking about co-products from the processing industry, the food processing industry, which is local. So these kind of ingredients, which we are to use more and more, get into the composition of feed at local level. So it's about maybe indeed addressing certain ultra specialization situations where there is certainly a progress to be made, but the models that exist today in mixed regions, if I may say so, is working, I think, pretty well from this perspective.
Okay, Jean-Louis, did you want to comment?
Yes, I fully agree. I think we need both. First, circularity should be conceived at local, regional level, basically, for a lot of reasons. The availability of byproducts, the digital tools which can help to favor exchange between farmers which are not far, but we can also imagine bigger scales thanks to industry. For example, when we can treat manure in region where we have far too much manure, to export mineral nitrogen or to export compost to other regions or on a longer distance. So I think that there is no exclusive solution. We need to find the most convenient from an economical point of view, for a carbon footprint point of view, solution. So we should not exclude one or another solution. We need to think locally and expand the thought to a larger scale.
Okay.
Especially for feed. If we imagine in the future that we can develop in Europe the soy production, for example, but we will not produce soy everywhere in Europe. So we will need exchange. It's clear.
Okay. Amrit, it would be good if we could start bringing in some of the questions from Mentimeter, and maybe we will also move to the next question that we want to ask our audience. And the next question on Mentimeter, if you log back on, you will see that we have listed the recommendations, and we want you to rank those for us, please, in order of priority for you. So, Amrit, if you could both put that question up in Mentimeter and maybe ask or show one or two of the questions that have been asked on Mentimeter, and we will discuss those now.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Yes, we do have quite a lot of very interesting questions. So I'll just ask some of the ones that have the most likes. So here you can see the trends towards intensification and specialization were driven by economics. So how can we reconnect crops and livestock without changing the economic system?
Okay, so Max wants to have a go at that one.
It's a very good question. I think that we as farmers also always sit down and think about it. I mean, if it is in between crop system and crop system or in between livestock system. But I think that there we have to start to think out of the box again. We have been given quite good tools. We have, at this point, given even legislational possibilities with going together. Farmers can join up in together more and more. We have that possibility there. But we also have today, like I already said, we do have these kind of tools so we can connect in between the farms and try to see what I can grow for you, what you can grow for me. So we have to start one more time to work more together in these things. We can organize ourselves better and try to see locally, like we have been talking. I think we have more or less answered this one here. For sure, when you then bring in the economy into this thing, then it's always very, very difficult from where will you get it in. But if you can shorten your transports, you can have a sure market for the crops that you are growing. You might even be able then as an arable farm to include already at that point also grass into your crop rotation. That would help me at least having a better soil structure in many ways. We might be able to find there the economy in there. It might not come straight as the euro in the hand, but it comes indirect, that I will be able to get better yields when I have my soil in better shape. I might be able to get also a market for some of the crops that might not fulfill the quality of the food industry. It might find it straight on farm use in a different way. So I mean, in this way, I think that you can say that you bring in also the economy into it. But this is $1 million question.
Okay, and I guess policy will have a very big role to play there, and maybe Roberto, when he's making his closing remarks, might wish to make a comment on that. Do you want to go to the next question, Amrit?
Yes. So the next question is, if you have intensive crop and intensive livestock production reconnected, is there much benefit for biodiversity? Do we not also need to reduce intensification?
Okay, so maybe I might go to Jean-Louis this time, Max, and then bring you in. So the question is, I guess, if all you're doing is putting an intensive livestock farm side by side with an intensive crop farm, where is the payoff for biodiversity there?
It's difficult to answer this question, but I think that again, we need a diversity of production system, because we have a diversity of consumer demand first. Some are claiming for prices, some are claiming for environmental goods, some are claiming for animal welfare, and so on. So we need diversity of system. And after, I think that we need to, I don't like intensification versus extensification. We need to change the way of production. And when we claim that using more diverse crop rotation, we can produce less grain wheat per hectare, but we will produce more, either the same amount of biomass, but a more diverse biomass. So shall we speak about extensification? I'm not so sure. It depends. We probably, in some region, we need to disintensify a little bit. Clearly, when we think about the livestock issue, some slight or moderate disintensification in some region open a new way of action, clearly, but it means that we move some livestock from one place to another place, because we just before we discussed about reintroduction of livestock in some region where we have not enough livestock to ensure soil fertility, for example. And we have experiments like this in France, for example, but not only in France. So we need to reallocate. Is it extensification or not? It's the same amount of production at the country level, but it is spread differently on the territory, which is the most important aspect, I think.
I think
so
you're
probably some disintensification in some area, but a sort of re-intensification in other area. It depends.
I think you showed some data on your slides where in a a cropping system with a more diverse rotation, there was a reduced use of pesticides. And so presumably that will be good for biodiversity. Max, did you want to add anything briefly on this?
Yes, I was just going to come in maybe more from the biodiversity side. I mean, even an intensive crop farm can be, good for the biodiversity. But if you can mix these two, at least what I see, if you have a synergy there, you will bring in new crops into the cropping system, into the rotation for the farm. That would also be a breaker crop. That would mean that less disease, less pests would be there. So there would be less use of PPPs in that area. Maybe even some crops is also helping with even the weed problems and all of these. So yes, this would be able to bring in. Plus, at the same time, you would bring in new flowering crops in there, mainly of the protein side. They're flowering, very good for pollinators, biodiversity in that way. So like Jean-Louis also said, I would not either go into this intensification. Intensive can also be good for the biodiversity, because sometimes it might be that when you really can keep the fields and everything really in good shape in that way, it's not only the crop that grows there, also the soil, it will also bring in good to it. So I think it's very difficult to talk about this intensification versus biodiversity, etc.
Okay, thank you. Amrit, we might look at the answers to the ranking and have some discussion of that.
Yes. So here we are. We didn't have a huge amount of voters, about a quarter of the people.
Well, it's quality, not quantity, we're after here. So, so anyway, optimizing the synergy in circular livestock cropping systems is number one. And governance and roles of stakeholders and public policies to promote changes over time. Number two, and an LCA upgrade to track progress towards more sustainable farming. I might ask Mark and then Jean-Louis just to react to that ranking. Does that surprise you, or does that fit with your own assessment really of the different recommendations that were made? Do you want to go first, Mark?
I can. No, I'm not totally surprised. In this story, the key question is, what are the desirable short-term impacts of actions? And certain of the things are probably almost on the shelf if we would focus on it and enable it. And we didn't discuss that in too much detail, but what is a farmer in a particular region of Europe wanting? He wants actually to understand what is the better rotation scheme, what kind of land races and varieties he can access to mitigate and optimize his production concept, etc. And this is very doable knowledge development, provided that actually it becomes accessible to farmers, and this is okay. But then if you think about the longer term impacts and where you want to align the feed requirements with the future genetics of your livestock, then you enter a path that actually can take a lot of time. The same with the protein crops. I mean, there have been done beautiful efforts in Canada and Australia, and basically it would be possible to acquire the different breeding populations and test grow them across Europe and see what is the better starting point actually to progress them. This is one way, fast track, very doable. Academia can help here enormously to understand what is possible. And at the same time, you would say intrinsically, I would like to remove some of the shortcomings of protein crops so that they're a bona fide party actually in the crop rotation scheme and can be grown easily by farmers. And then you're talking about tracks of innovation that are 30 years plus away. And so in this ranking, I see what is happening here, but what of course for the audience as an additional information would be beautiful to get is, do you see this as a fast track solution, or do you see this in the longer term this needs to be established? That's, from my opinion, very important, and especially the governmental roles here, that has to go tailored with a kind of concerted plan that you would like to roll out in the value chain.
Okay, before I go to you, Jean-Louis, maybe to react to that ranking.
No,
Amrit, just first, if I could ask Amrit maybe to put up the next question. which is relevant to this. It's relevant to the LCA, and Jean-Louis presented that we need a better LCA. So the question is, what LCA indicators are missing? So while that has been answered, Jean-Louis, did you want to make any comment on the first question and the ranking that appeared there?
About the ranking, globally, I agree at the global level, but after the ranking can be very different according to the situation. For example, biotechnology are on number 6, but in some area, it is perhaps the most important level of action in a short term. So probably we need also to consider that there is difference between regions in the classification. Why LCA indicators are missing? It's just because we have not enough science. I think that sometimes research is not very innovative. We are working on one topic with 1 or 2 publications, then another team go on the same topic and go again on new publication, and we make progress in a small area, but we totally forget that huge area are an unknown area. And I think it's typically the case of life cycle analysis. We made a major progress to evaluate carbon footprint, but we just forget that carbon footprint is only one aspect of performance of the agricultural system. And today there is no indicators to evaluate the biodiversity of the system. And today, how we can evaluate between system A and system B the best in terms of biodiversity? We just have no indicators. How we can manage indicators, local indicators, for example, the number of species of plant in my field, and external indicators, how many deforestation in my diet, how we can merge local and global for biodiversity. We have not enough research to do this. So it's why some indicators are missing. We miss to think globally in a systematic way, even with LCA. Basically, because LCA is a method which came from industry, and in industry, when we produce a good, we have negative impact on the environment. For agriculture is totally different because we act on environment and we can have very positive effect, notably in terms of biodiversity. So the agricultural sector is very different from the industrial one, and LCA is basically the method defined for industrial aspect. Okay. So it works for industrial farming system, but not for agroecological farming system. Yeah. This is
if I may add to this, one of the main risks actually that we run is that we start going with an incomplete or imperfect LCA approach, where data gap filling actually creates information that might be sometimes misleading and would not allow you to see actually where true pain points are. And ultimately, LCA should be useful I'm not saying at a farm level necessarily, but in a region level that actually is affordable and doesn't actually stop and slow down actors to actually carry out their activities. And we are far away from that.
Thank you. And we can see the suggestions as to what's missing are very clear. Biodiversity is by far the biggest, followed by circularity, ecosystem services, food culture, social benefits. So look, I think there are none of those a surprise, I'm sure. Amrit, we might try to take 2 more questions from Mentimeter before we start to close up, and maybe okay, so the first one is again related to LCAs. Why focus mainly on life cycle analysis as the evaluation framework and not on a multi-criteria assessment, considering services and properties benefits expected? I think, Jean-Louis, do you want to comment on that? I think really that's what you're suggesting needs to happen. The LCA needs to develop into that multi-criteria assessment.
In our vision paper, we focus on LCA because it is a standardized method, and well-recognized method, so we need to improve it, and we can use it. Imagine other method, for example, the concept of bundle of services, which is different, but much more adapted to evaluate ecosystem services. But it is the method is in its infancy. So we need to make research on this concept of bundle of services. So it is for a medium-term future. Today, we shall use LCA, and we need to improve LCA, even if we think that it's not a perfect tool, but it is a tool.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Amrit. Okay, what is your opinion on the demand to decrease the, I presume that should be the numbers of livestock in relation to decreased red meat consumption and the impact on grasslands as well as natural habitat biodiversity? Who wants to kick off on that one? So, you know, what is your opinion on decreasing livestock in order to decrease red meat consumption and the impact that will have on grassland and natural habitat biodiversity?
First, livestock produce something else than red meat. It produces milk, it produces white meat also. So here livestock is put for ruminant, I presume. It's a difficult question. I'm afraid that the number of livestock will decrease in Europe much faster than the consumption of meat, just because of economic constraint of farmers. This is the first point. The second point is, and if livestock farming decrease quite faster in Europe than consumption, we will import meats. But in our system, livestock is the most efficient on the global level to produce meat in terms of greenhouse gas per kg of meat, for example. European system is much more efficient, but Asiatic system, North America system, or African system, it's worse. So we need to take care that not to export pollution to other parts of the world. And the last point is that because our system is the most efficient, we can produce to export to some region where it is much more difficult to produce, while preserving the total, while reducing the carbon footprint of the diet at the global level. So we need to take care also of the market. So to be honest, I think that in the future the livestock sector will be reduced in Europe, but much more for economical reason, but for social reason. And the consumption of meat doesn't decrease so much indeed. I look at the statistic in different European countries, we are more or less on a plateau. It decreased, and now we reach more or less a plateau. So perhaps it will decrease again with a new generation of consumer. Why not? And we have more and more substitute on the market. But we need to take care that we need livestock to use biomass. Don't forget that at the global level, more than 6 billion tons of dry matter are produced each year by photosynthesis. And we need ruminant to use this biomass because this biomass is produced in an area where it is very difficult to collect the biomass with machinery.
Okay, can I stop you there, Jean-Louis? And I know Arnaud and Max had their hands up, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. So if you have a comment, Arnaud or Max, could you maybe put it into the chat and we can see it there. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to lots of very good questions that were entered in Mentimeter, but thank you for the questions. I think even to see them is stimulating in itself. I would now like to move to our closing remarks from Roberto Boretti. And Roberto is a member of the cabinet of Commissioner Wojciechowski, the Commissioner for Agriculture, and his areas of responsibility include rural development, relationships with the IFIs, Horizon Europe and research, animal welfare, promotion of high quality food standards and other items. So Roberto, the floor is yours to make some concluding remarks.
Thanks a lot, Frank, and thanks a lot to Animal Task Force and Plants for the Future platform for inviting me. I'm really happy to be and honored to be with you. I do confess that I learned a lot today, And of course, greetings from Commissioner Wojciechowski, who appreciates very much your work and your commitment in this field. I start telling you that I fully copy what Jean-Louis and Marc position has been expressed during the response in the last two questions, because as they explained very well, the indicators are not completed, and I would like to stress the importance of a food culture specifically into the diet. We have to be more keen in the education of the population, and this is this could be the base for the last question that they posed: the use of red meat and the right balance of our diet. As it has been very well, loud and clear already said, let me scroll very quickly, saying that modernization of agriculture led to increased productivity, often through intensification and specialization. Plant and animal production follow more and more their own paths. The so-called Green Revolution ensured food security in Europe and enabled the EU to be a very important actor in global agricultural trade, like Jean-Louis correctly underlined a few minutes ago. For the last decades, the agriculture and food systems in Europe have been impressively reliable and supply more food than demanded at historical low prices. However, the future food and nutrition security in Europe cannot be taken for granted. In an increasingly complex and uncertain world, which is anticipating to be home to 9 billion people by mid-century, which is already experiencing unprecedented environmental changes, and in which the state of global geopolitical tensions is high, sustainably, the ability of agriculture and food systems to provide enough food for all is likely to be a substantial challenge for Europe in the future. This evolution also led to an increased use of inputs in agriculture, like has been said very well. Biodiversity, ecosystems, soil structure, and contents certainly suffered from this. There is the need, therefore, to implement more environmentally, animal, and health-friendly production methods, while at the same time improving the economic and social aspect of farming system. The European Commission is very conscious of the need to drive agriculture and food system towards more sustainable practices. And this was embedded in the Green Deal, especially the biodiversity and farm to fork strategy. I don't want to repeat all the targets that we outline into those two strategies, but the proposed new common agriculture policy will contribute as well to these efforts toward greener and more sustainable agriculture. We are aware that livestock is important for agriculture and food system. While negative impacts are often put forward, the socioeconomic dimension of animal farming, as well as its contribution to ecosystem services, including potential to reduce greenhouse gas emission, should be exploited, and where necessary, further research and innovation will be performed. I really welcome the intervention of Marc on the new breeding technique. Reconnecting animal and plant production is really very interesting to allow to move away from sectorial silo approach, and so far to go toward more systemic approaches, like your model recommendation in rejuvenating agriculture by circle and efficient food production system with less use of fertilizer and pesticides, increasing in this way biodiversity and, in the same manner, returning to healthier soil. And this is the precondition of health, food, and ecosystem. I would like to mention, just to flag, that the European Union is going to issue an important document, a delegate act on taxonomy, which will outline the various action and activities that are able to contribute to climate change mitigation. So research innovation as well are the key drivers in accelerating the transition to sustainable, healthy, and inclusive food systems, from primary production to consumption. Research innovation at an appropriate level will be key to contribute to turn the significant obligation for farmers ahead into opportunities, like Lucas said very well in the beginning, for people, planet, and climate. The EU is well placed to address the various challenges. The recommendations that you make are inspirational to us. Some of them are being addressed, at least in part, under the current framework program for research and innovation, Horizon 2020. But obviously more needs to be done. With the forthcoming framework program, Research Innovation Horizon Europe, we are confident that more sources will be available to address these challenges. Just a few flagships. Mission in the area of soil health and food will aim to develop solutions for restoring soil health and function. New knowledge and innovation will also scale up agroecology and a primary production through a dedicated partnership on agroecology living laboratories. In the future, we want to strengthen EIP Agri as well. Just to conclude, cooperation with and within the public sector, be it at EU or at national, regional, or local levels, as well as with the private sector, will be instrumental to address these challenges. Let me outline a couple of things that I pick and choose from your clouds. I was really focused, and my attention was catched by two things: the correspondency between soil health and food security, circularity and farm autonomy. And let me just mention a guy who was reaffirming an old concept. That guy was also the ruin of UK and EU, David Cameron, but nonetheless, he did also some good speeches or statements. He picked up at the beginning of his action as a prime minister the concept of big society. Is very keen, my commissioner, to help the reduction of the transports, the average kilometers of the transports of the food and of the inputs for agriculture, because it's, of course, a burden in the economy and also a burden for the agri-sector. So let me just close with this. We look forward to further interacting with you, to further develop and operationalize these ideas. Many wishes for a successful future and for your activities, also for my commissioner. I have to leave you because I've been called for the taxonomy meeting that I foreseen in a while.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for all.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and enjoy your taxonomy meeting. It sounds very exciting, so we will wish you well with that. Look, we're finishing up now, everybody, and look, I would like to just one or two quick messages before we finish. There were a lot of questions on Mentimeter. Thank you, everyone, for submitting those questions. We will ask the speakers to try to give brief answers to those, and we will put them on websites of both organizations in a Q&A format. Yeah, had I any other notices? I don't think so. So listen, it just remains to thank our speakers and panelists and Roberto and Lucas for participating in the seminar this afternoon. It was, I think, very informative. We had over 150 people, and the vast majority of those stayed for nearly the full 2 hours. So that shows how interesting I think the seminar was. So thank you very much for that. To all our attendees, thank you very much for attending. You know, that is why we do this, so that people can hear about the work. So we were delighted that so many people did attend, and thank you for your active participation on Mentimeter. And to Amrit and Florence and Susanna for the very efficient organization of the webinar. I think it worked very well. Obviously, we would prefer if we could have done this face-to-face, but then maybe we would not have had 155 people. So there are trade-offs and synergies here, but I think in terms of organization, it has worked very well. And I think we got some very nice information, and hopefully people have enjoyed the last 2 hours. So thank you for that, and for further information, I would refer you to the website of Animal Task Force and plans for the future, and we will continue to look forward to future engagements with you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.